Just a comment.
Okay.
As for me, I think it was a great introduction to Revit. And in case anyone floated or didn't understand something, or maybe wants a deeper understanding, there are a lot of resources on YouTube that you can leverage on for a deep understanding and practice. Practice is crucial. As for me, I have some experience in Revit. That's why this was a walkthrough. Uh, but in case anyone is having trouble, you can definitely look up YouTube tutorials for, as an introduction.
Okay. Definitely. All right. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Okay. So just like you mentioned as well, if you are having any issues with navigation with Revit, you can look at some introductory videos as well on that. Okay. All right. So if anybody has any other questions as well, I will also try to um, try to address them in the meeting. Okay. All right. So now let's go ahead and still look more in depth in this model. So if I wanted to look at it straight off the bat from the 3D view, I can use what we call a section box. Now a section box allows you to cut through various planes in the 3D view to look at it better. If I wanted to look at a section on the ground floor, what I could do, for instance, is that in the 3D view with nothing being selected, and you know that nothing is being selected because in the properties dialog box you see here it's highlighted as 3D. If I scroll down, for instance, or rather scroll here, you're going to see under the extents, you see here section box. I'm going to turn on this section box and then click on apply. You can see here it's going to create a box around the building. Now if I click on the box, what that box enables me to do is that I can make a section using the grips or the controls. So if I wanted to look at the ground floor plan in more detail, I can click on this arrow and then drag it downwards to make a cut through the building. So just like that, I can see the floor better. Okay. And then, for instance, if there were more models and elements in the elements, I can actually look at it in more detail. If I wanted to look at the first floor plan, I can click on the section box again, and I can drag it up to look at that in more detail. And this is very useful because it allows me to make better decisions and have a clearer understanding of how the particular building is modeled. I can also make sections on the sides as well. So if I click here, I can make a section to the side like this to look at the building better. I can also do it as well from the left and the right. If I wanted to, for instance, focus on a particular room, I can just control and move this in a way so I can see it better. So let's say I just want to focus on this store. So I can do that like this. Now a combination of using the section box and all the navigation tools that we've learned earlier on will enable you to use Revit better for interrogating or deciphering architecture. Now something as well that is very useful to notice is that if you are going to be moving around, you need to understand what you're looking at the time you're looking at it. So at some point when you are navigating, you may lose direction of where the building is. So that's why we have what we call this navigation cube at the top. If you've used AutoCAD before, you may be familiar with this as well. So we can see here that this is south. So that means whatever we are looking at from this region looking in this direction is the south view. You can see here that this is east, so we're looking at it from this. We can also see the orientation. So if I wanted to look at it from the top, I can actually do that as well. So if I click on top, for instance, here, you can see I'm looking at the view from the top. If I wanted to look at it in the actual direction, so that means that south should be here. Right now, south is in this direction. I can go ahead and click on these arrows to either look at it in that direction. So in this case, I'm going to turn it anti-clockwise. So right now, this is the south view. If I wanted to look at it from the north, but not being here, I can navigate by moving these keys until it is on the right direction. I can also as well switch between the side views as well by clicking on these arrows to switch. Let me turn off my section box so we have better understanding. So over here in the properties dialog box with nothing being selected, I'm going to turn off the section box and click on apply. So we have the whole building in view again. So depending on what we're doing, we can as well navigate either left, right, front, or side. We can also look at it from the top, we can even look at it from the bottom, as the case may be also. So I can click on it to look at it from the bottom, depending on what we want. Alright, good. I can also click on the edges of the box as well to look at it from an isometric view. So I can do this to look at it from the side, maybe the northeast, northwest, all of that. I can look at it better. Alright, good. So we've been able to look at this particular model better. So it's a very simple one. So we have an understanding of what is there. So for instance, I can see here visibly that we have the stairs looking, or rather going towards this region. I can as well see another stairs here. I can see the shops. You can see that the entrances to the shops are made up of curtain walls, and then we have a glass door over here. For the shops over here, if I look at the back, I can see here that the entrances are through the back like this. These are the larger stores, and then we have a walkway over here. We can also see some sorts of architectural architectural columns over here holding the building in place. So this is a clear indication of where we can actually place columns later on. I also have information as well for the floors. Now this is very vital as well. We need to have this information before we go into working on the structure. So for instance here, a good point for placing columns, for instance, in buildings is to know the width of the wall. Now let's go ahead and look at it in more detail. I'm going to go ahead and select this wall, for instance, over here. If I click on the wall, just like any other object we select in Revit, you're going to see more information about it under the properties dialog box. You can see here that we have the detail for where the wall is starting, this particular one we've selected. We can see it over here, that we have the base level or base constraint to be set to the ground floor, and we have the top constraint set to the first floor. We also have some other information such as base offset, top offsets, and then some information about the length, the area, and the volume as well. So we need not have to actually calculate this manually. So that's one of the advantages of using a BIM software such as Revit. It's also useful as well when you are creating schedules, but in our own case or discipline, we're going to be focusing on schedules that have to relate with structural elements. To know the exact width of the wall, I can actually go ahead and click on this option called Edit Type. You can also see as well the name of the wall, but we need to be actually sure the width of the wall is exactly what the name says it is. So if I click on Edit Type, under this properties panel here, we see what we call the information or type parameters to the wall. So we see the wall here is named 225 mm. And then under the construction and other information, we have the width to be 225 mm. So this is a clear indication that the length or rather the width of the wall is exactly what we say it is, or rather what the name says it is. We also have some other information about the wall as well. We have its thermal properties, all of that as it goes on. Now this can be based off what the exact material of the wall is, but we'll actually cover that more in depth when we go into the structural aspects. In case we're actually wondering, depending on how the model is and how much effort the architects put into it, you may see some other information that may be added. So for instance, the cost, assembly code, where it's being ordered from. So all of that can be put inside the Revit model. If I go ahead and cancel, I don't necessarily need to go and check every single wall one by one. So for instance, now if I go, let's go and look at a wall, interior wall. If I go ahead and click on this wall, for instance, you can see that this wall has the same type as the first one that we create or that we selected, which is the 225 mm wall, meaning that all these walls as well also have the same width. If I wasn't too sure, just by looking at the parameter, I can actually go ahead and measure it myself. We can use simple dimension tools in Revit. Now to do that, all I need to do is I need to come over here to the Modify tab. Under the Modify tab, we have quite a number of tools we'll be using in day out when we're using Revit. But let's start with the Measure tools. Over here, we have what we call the Measure Between Two References. And this one is what we use when we don't want to create permanent dimensions. We can use it to quickly look at the dimensions between two references. Now, a video will always show on how to use the particular tool as well as description about it. If I move my cursor and then click on the drop down, you have different options for using this. I'm going to be using the measure between two references. Once I've done that, you can see my cursor changes. Now it's telling me to go ahead and pick a first reference. So I'm just going to move over to the wall. And if I move over to the edge of the wall, you can see that it snaps to the nearest. I'm just going to click there. And then moving my cursor straight as possible, you're going to see that I can go ahead and click on the other points, just like this. So the nearest edge. So you can see here that it has a measurement of 225 mm. I can continue going to go and do other measurements as well. So by clicking like this, sorry about that. I'm going to click from here to here. You can see this as well is 225 mm. If I go ahead and click from here to here, you can see this is 225 mm as well. If I wanted to see permanent dimensions, what I could do is I can use this dimension tool. If I click on this, and right now it is set to align dimension, we're going to use this. I can go ahead and measure between two edges of the wall. So for instance, I want to measure between this edge and this edge. But you can see here that right now it is snapping to the center of the wall, and I don't want to use that reference. So this is quite a tricky tip in Revit. So if you are not getting the right reference once you've moved your icon or your cursor to that particular element you want to measure, all you need to do is just press the tab key, and now it will move to a different reference. So right now it is set to the edge of the wall. If I click there, I can move my cursor to the other edge, and if it is not selecting that reference, all I need to do again is just press the tab key until it moves to the reference I want. When I click there, you can now see that I have created a reference, or rather a dimension. I can actually determine where I want to place it by moving my cursor either up and down based on where I placed it originally. And I can go ahead and click again just to place it. Yeah, so this is clear indication that this over here is 225 mm. You can as well also use the dimension tool to look at the spans between the rooms as well. So right now we see here that these rooms, most of the rooms, the shops rather, are about 4.5 meters. So in this direction. But we don't have any dimension stating what it is from here to here. Okay, actually we do on the left side, but let's or right side rather, let's say we don't actually have that. So all I need to do is just go ahead and use the dimension tool again. Now if I wanted to use a recent tool that I've used in Revit, all I need to do, for instance, is I can go ahead and press enter. When I press enter, it's going to bring up the last command that I used. If I don't want to use that tool, I can either press escape or press the modify key. So let me go over that again. If I wanted to use the last tool I used in Revit, which was the align dimension, I can press enter to bring up that last tool. And if I don't want to use it, I can either press escape or press modify at the top of my screen. Likewise as well, Revit also has what we call shortcuts. Now these shortcuts enable you to move faster depending on how much you're going to be using the software. So for instance now, if I move my cursor to this measure tool, you're going to see here that the shortcut there is DI, and you see it just beside the name of the tool. You can also apply or rather set shortcuts as well, keyboard shortcuts, but we won't cover that now. So right now that shortcut is DI. All I need to do is just simultaneously press DI on my keyboard. I can see that the dimension tool is now active. I can go ahead now and click on the references that I want to measure. So from this grid line to this grid line, between the center lines of the walls. And I can see that this over here has a width or length in this case of 4.35 meters. Likewise, this room as well also has 4.35 meters. Just like I mentioned before, to exit the tool, all you need to do is press escape or press modify. Now, if the tool is still active after you press escape, you just need to press escape again to exit it. Alright, good. So please, like I mentioned before, practice makes perfect. So it's very important that you try to use some of these quick tools. Alright, great. Likewise as well, I can also see more information about some elements such as the width of the doors. This quite takes a lot of time to actually understand. So if I click on the door, for instance, I can see here that this is a double swing glass door over here. And if I go over here and click on the edit type, I can see more properties such as the width of the door, we have the height, and this particular one here is sorry, okay, this particular one here is not actually measured. For instance, in if I am correct, it's not actually measured. Okay, yeah, so this is measured in sorry. So it's measured in Some of the values may not be measured in and that's basically how, based on how the person that created that particular door actually did it. So for instance, how to explain that is that if I click on the door as I have done right now, you see at the top of the screen we have this option here called edit family, so you can actually see more in depth on how that particular door was created. Now this is a more in-depth feature in Revit, but if you are going to be using it for maybe deciphering architecture, and most of the time the architects may throw in all sorts of models and families inside the project, you want to understand exactly what is what, you need to actually go ahead and check. So if I go ahead and click on this edit family, it opens another window of exactly where um okay, let me just click OK, accept anything for now. It goes ahead and shows you more details exactly of how the door was created. Now we can look at these families as blocks if you've used AutoCAD before. So if I wanted to create multiple instances of a particular object, I can just create a family instead of going to go and draw it over and over again. So we can see here that we have the door details right now. At the top of your screen, you're going to see an option here called family types. And let me go, I have this on my second screen. So there's going to be an additional option over here, so you can see more details about the doors. So just like I guessed, most of these values here are in inches, right? So you can see that we have the door height in inches, we have the door width in inches, right? So it's very important to know exactly what is measured in, so we don't go and have conversion mistakes. If for instance I wanted to actually go ahead and change these values here to meters or millimeters, I can come over here to the modify tab, or rather the manage tab, and under here we have the project units, just like I explained earlier on. So I can decide to change this length here from inches, I can change it here to millimeters. If I do that and click OK and OK over here, and I come back here to the create tab and click on family types like this, you can see now all those values are now going to be in mm. Okay, so this is actually a pro tip, and I do advise, as if you are going to be working with models that are sent from architects or other professionals, is something that you have to end up doing. I'm going to close this here, and when I'm done, I need to go ahead and load this back into the project. So I'm not doing anything over here again in this family. So I'm going to load and close into the project. In this case here, it's asking me if I want to save changes to the door. In this case here, right now I don't want to save it to my window, so I'm going to click on no, and now it's going to load it back into the project. So now is finding out that there is already an instance of this door family in this project. So it's asking me if I want to overwrite the existing version, so I'm going to click on this option to overwrite the existing version. Just going to wait for that to load up, and you see the process here at the bottom of the screen. It's going to regenerate some of those parameters for the other doors. Alright, good. So once that is done, if I click on the door again and I click on edit type, alright, so we still have these dimensions over here. In some of them may not actually be in depth. Let me just go over and check. Okay, alright, so some of them may actually be measured in inches, but that means there is a family inside the family that we need to edit. So that's actually another topic for another day. But if you wanted to check it, you can just go ahead and just use the dimension tools, just like I mentioned earlier on. Alright, so just like this, I can check here the width of the door and more information. Now we've checked for some of the things such as doors. We can also check the floor details. If I click on this floor, for instance here, we can see this is the finish. So I want to actually select the floor. Let me go over here and move to the floor. So this is where we have the edge of the floor. So you can see before selecting it as well, it will show you exactly what you are highlighted on. So if I click on this, for instance here, I have now selected the actual floor. We see here that this floor has a thickness of 150 mm, but like I said before, we can never be too sure. So I'm going to click on edit type. I can see here that the actual thickness of the floor is 175 mm. So this is an example in a case where the name does not actually reflect the actual thickness of the floor. So in this case here, what I'm going to do is that I am going to go ahead and rename this here to 175. So right now it is set to generic floor 150. So I'm going to change this here to 175 and then click OK. When I'm done, I click OK as well. Now if I click on the floor, you can see now it reflects the actual length, or rather the actual depth of the floor. If I come as well and go to the 3D view, I can actually see exactly what I'm selecting. So for instance, you can see here that this is the 175 mm floor. I'm also going to check as well the depth of the floor for the first floor. Okay, so right now if I move my cursor to the edge here where I have this floor, I can click on it. So we also have this same 175 mm floor at the top as well. Now another pro tip as well is that based on how these particular settings that you see at the bottom of the screen have been adjusted, it will enable you to select some objects. Now let me go ahead and explain that. If I go back to the ground floor plan, you can see that if I move to the center of an open area like a floor, you can see that the floor is being highlighted. Right now this is just a finished surface. And the reason why it is actually allowing me to highlight the floor is because I have this option here turned on, which is select elements by face. If I go ahead and turn it off, which is actually how it is going to be by default, you notice that if I move over inside, in some cases I may not be able to select that floor. So for instance here, you can see that I can select it, and that's just because this particular floor in this case here has some pattern on it. But if I come over to this floor, for instance, even though I'm on the face here, you can see that I can't select it. So even if I click and drag over it, you can see I cannot select the floor. But if I go over here, for instance, and turn this on, you can see that just by clicking, just by moving my mouse inside there, I can now select the floor. Alright, good. So this is going to be useful in some cases, especially when you are making selections. Alright, good. So we've gone ahead now and looked at some things, pivotal information over here in our model. Now we can go ahead now and actually start our structural model, for instance. Okay, so we've gone and looked, as a recap, let's go ahead and look at the model. We looked at how we start off by looking at a project, so by loading it up in Revit. I talked about the compatibility. For instance, if you're using an older version of Revit, you can't open a newer version or a model saved in a newer version. Likewise as well, I also talked about how to look at the properties of whatever you've selected in Revit. So for instance here, if I go ahead and select this roof, I can see some of the properties of the roof as well as the thicknesses. And over here I talked about the family type as well. I also talked about how to look and navigate through the project browser to see the particular view that you're working out. So for instance, I talked about how to look at floor plans, for instance. I talked about how to look at 3D views. I talked about how to look at building elevation views. We also looked at how to check the section views, and then also to determine what section that we're looking at per time by looking at the properties in the properties tab over here. So that's quite just a few things that we actually talked about earlier on. So just like I explained as well, practice is very important. And if you are following as well, feel free to let me know in the chat box. So that's if you're actually practicing as we speak. Feel free to let me know. And in the next 1 hour, we're actually going to start off ahead, and it's going to be important for me to know who exactly is following, so we move at adequate pace. Okay. All right, so at this point here, I believe it would be nice to take probably, let's say, 5 minutes break, a 5 minutes break, and then we'll reconvene at exactly 7, or rather, by your time should be 9:01 a.m. 9:01 a.m. Okay, so at this point here, I want to ask if anybody has any questions. Feel free to let me know. I'll be glad to address them.